Welcome back to my channel. Before we get started, click that subscribe button, turn on notifications, give me a huge thumbs up. And you only get 10 seconds this time. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's all the time you got to like, subscribe. Well, give me a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the post notifications. Great, there's a camera here. Okay, so I'm in my boat right now, and today we are going to be reading, as you can see by the title, Little Miss Splendid and the House with a View. So let's read it. A bit. Little Miss Splendid and the House with a View. Little Miss Splendid, a house with a view, and the house with a view. Little Miss Splendid looked out of her very splendid window, set in her most splendid house, at her very splendid garden, and smiled. There's Little Miss Splendid. That's her whole house. Well, that's her house window. I tried to go across. I feel like they were like watching me or something. Okay. And then she frowned. Little Miss Splendid looked out of her window every morning, and every morning she smiled. And then she frowned. And what made her frown? I'll tell you. There's Little Miss Splendid. She's very cool. Ready? Go do her face. Okay. At the bottom of her garden, on the other side, a small stream, lived Mr. Mean. Okay, I don't know. Mr. Mean. Unlike Mrs. Splendid's very large and most splendid house, Mr. Mean's house is very small and very run down. Run down means like old and not nice. A not at all splendid house. In fact, the most unsplendid house one could ever imagine. There's Mr. Mean's house. It's very cracked, and there's like a stream. There's like a path. Look how long this is. Okay. Mr. Mean was the sort of person who did not like spending money, especially on his house. Little Miss Splendid was the complete opposite, and she did not like having Mr. Mean as a neighbour. His house quite ruined her splendid view. It was on this particular morning, as she stood looking out of her window, that Miss Splendid had an idea. She rang her builder, Mr. Trowell. Mr. Trowell. "Hello," she said. "This is Miss Splendid. I I would like to build a wall for me. I would like you to build a wall for me. Come at once. There's little Miss Splendid talking to Mr. Trowell. I don't know his name. Mr. Trowell was over within an hour, and within a day he had built a wall at the bottom of Little Miss Splendid's garden. A high wall. A wall that hid Mr. Main's house. That was real big. That's how tall the wall is. Well, the wall's actually tall. I don't know what I just said. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm grunting. Now Mr. Mean also liked to look out of his window each morning. He had a splendid view of Miss Splendid's extraordinary splendid house. And what made the view all the more splendid for Mr. Mean was the fact that it hadn't cost him a penny. There's Mr. Mean, and there's his cracked window. And there's his house colour. Sorry. Mr. Mean was very unhappy. He looked out of his window the next day, and all he could see was a high red brick wall. But he stood there looking out of his window. Mr. Mean had an idea. Uh-oh. The next morning, when little Miss Splendid looked out of her window, she couldn't believe her eyes. There was a huge hole in her beautiful wall, and through the hole she could see Mr. Mean's ramshackle house. There's little Miss Splendid, and there's Mr. Mean's house, and there's the wall broken. Miss Splendid was furious. She rang Mr. Trowell immediately, and by lunchtime Mr. Trowell had rebuilt the wall. And then it's gonna get me again. I can tell. Exactly like a fight. But the next morning there was another hole in her wall. And so it went on all week. Overnight, Mr. Mean would knock a hole in the wall, and the next day Mr. Trowell would come and repair it. There's Mr. Mean, and there's the moon, and there's the wall. And then one morning, the whole wall had disappeared. But not just the wall. There was no sign of Mr. Mean's house either. Uh-oh. Where's it gone? It's not here. Yeah, I'm at Mr. Mean's house. No. That's strange, said Miss Splendid to herself. She put on her best hat and went to investigate. When she got down to where Mr. Mean's house had been, she heard the sound of building coming from another side of the hill. She climbed to the top of the hill. There's little Miss Splendid. It looks like she's on high heels. And There's the ginormous heel. She's gonna climb in high heels. And for the second time, she couldn't believe her eyes. There was Mr. Busy putting the finishing touches to a house that looked like hers and was even more splendid. There's the picture. You don't want to see more face. It looks good, doesn't it? Said a voice behind her. It was Mr. Mean. What, how? Spluttered Miss Splendid. It was all those bricks that gave me the idea, said Mr. Mean, and grinned. All those free bricks. Little Miss Splendid didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. And she went home to her splendid house. Is it a Miss Splendid shot? And there's, I think, a part of her house. A splendid house, but no longer the most splendid house. So that's the end of Little Miss Splendid and the house with a view. Yeah. So I'm doing my shout out in this video. I forgot to do one on Monday. I don't think I even did a video on Monday. Oh yeah, I did something afternoon, but I forgot that I was doing a shout out that day. And I forgot to do a video yesterday because I was out all day. So my shout out is Baby Bus. So the shout out I'm giving to is Baby Bus, yeah. And I hope you guys like this video. Please give it a big thumbs up if you liked it, and see you guys next time. Bye! Listen to Baby Bus as well.